In our Lent groups this week, we have been talking about pain and suffering. So it does feel like a bit of a gift that in the lectionary that we have the story of Lazarus. It's probably not a surprise given it's Lent and it comes around every 3 years, but it is a gift. But when we're in places of pain and suffering ourselves, whether it's something in our own lives or something that's happening around us or in the world, it's so easy to ask, where are you, Jesus? Let me go right back to the very beginning of the story. There's an awful lot in the passage, so forgive me for skipping over quite a bit as we go. But Mary and Martha have sent word to Jesus to tell him that Lazarus is sick, and we're told explicitly that Jesus loves this family. And yet, when he hears the news, he stays where he is for another 2 days. He says the illness will not lead to death, but will reveal the glory of God. After those 2 days, he tells the disciples that they are going back to Judea. There's a moment of confusion where he says Lazarus has fallen asleep, and they misunderstand him, so he says it plainly, Lazarus is dead. Then he adds, for your sake, I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe. If I'm honest, that is kind of confusing, but it is important to note that the delay was not accidental. It's not that Jesus didn't care. It's not that he failed to act in time, but he deliberately waited. By the time Jesus arrives, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. Now, I think that detail matters. Some later Jewish traditions suggest that for a short time after death, there was still a faint hope that life might return. By the 4th day, that hope was gone. 4 days in, a person was dead. Decay was setting in. There was no hope of resurrection. In the words of the King James Version, Lazarus stinketh. In other words, this is a situation that cannot be turned around. It's gone too far. But it's this reality that Jesus arrives to. Both Mary and Martha say the same thing to him. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It's an expression of grief. It's also a question and perhaps even a protest. Where were you? Why didn't you come? Why did you let this happen? And these are questions that are not limited to this story. They're questions that arise whenever there's suffering, whether in personal loss or in the wider world. They're questions that are asked in hospitals and homes and places of conflict and in situations where people feel abandoned and overwhelmed. But Jesus doesn't rebuke Martha and Mary for these questions. He just receives them. When Martha says it, he replies and tells her, I am the resurrection and the life. It's one of those statements that we have quite rightly latched onto and made a doctrine of our faith. But when Jesus said it, it was directly to Martha. Imagine Jesus saying this to her in her despair, in her pain, possibly in her anger. It's deeply personal. Jesus isn't saying this to a crowd as a sweeping statement. He's saying it face to face to someone he loves. And he continues to say it to us in our darkest moments too. I am the resurrection and the life. When Mary comes, she says the same thing, and at that point, Jesus responds with emotion. It's easy to latch onto the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. But here we risk focusing on Jesus weeping over his friend and missing the other key details. Because before we read that when Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him, and he was deeply troubled. So a question for the class. Why do you think Jesus was angry and deeply troubled? Yeah, so people around him, their unbelief. Yeah, that's a definite possibility. What other thoughts are there? It's unusual to see Jesus angry, so.
I think he was just angry at, I don't know, the brokenness around him, but that things were, I don't know.
Angry at the brokenness around him, like the fact that there is death in the first place, or yeah, I think that's good. I reckon there are three things happening here. I think there is definitely grief at the loss of his friend. The loss is real and it is personal, and he isn't standing apart from that. The anger, we're not told what it's directed at. I think there is definitely an element of it being at death itself, at the reality of a world where this happens, and at the brokenness that has brought humanity to this point. And there is definitely, I think, frustration that those around him don't see or understand what he has already declared about himself, that he is the resurrection and the life. I think it's interesting that a lot of Christians I talk to latch onto Jesus wept as the personal emotion of grief. But when you hear Jesus wept using as a slang phrase, it's often about frustration or anger or disbelief. I just think it's really interesting that wider society latches that. Because what we see in Jesus is not one simple emotion, but it's several all bound up and tangled together. It's strong and confronting language. It points to deep inner agitation. It includes grief, but anger, and a profound sense that this is not how things are meant to be. All of this is present at once. When Mary and Martha and each of us ask, Jesus, where are you? This muddle of emotions, I think, is the answer. He's right here with us in the middle of it all, not standing apart. When they do get to the tomb, Jesus, who, interestingly we're told, is still feeling angry at this point, says, roll the stone aside. It's an instruction that requires those present to move towards what they would rather avoid. The stone is not just a physical barrier, but it marks a boundary between what can still be faced and what has already been closed off and is too far gone. Martha protests her brother has been dead for 4 days. He stinketh, and this makes sense. There will be a smell. Opening the tomb will expose the reality of death in a way that just cannot be ignored. And yet the stone is taken away. And Jesus calls out, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus, well, comes out. The Jesus that we follow is not limited by our own human conclusions. Please don't hear that as a promise that everything we consider loss will be restored in the way that we might hope and expect. We know that's not true from our own experience and from the life of the world. This isn't how the story always unfolds. But what this moment does show us is that Jesus is not limited by what we have already concluded is beyond hope. Even when situations stinketh, when they're 4 days gone and beyond what we think can be salvaged, Jesus is still able to call life out of that place. It doesn't remove the grief or the anger or the confusion that we feel. Jesus himself has already stood in the middle of all. But it does mean that when we come to God, we don't need to pretend that things are better than they are. We don't need to resolve our questions before we speak them. We don't need to choose between grief and anger or between faith and frustration. We can bring all we are, all we feel, because that is what we see in Jesus at the tomb. In a moment for our time of prayer, we're going to move into a space of lament. Lament is not just about finding the right words or the right tone. It's about bringing what is true. It's about naming what hurts, what feels broken, what feels beyond hope, and placing it before God. You don't need to tidy it up. You don't need to make it sound faithful or even polite. You can simply bring what you are and what you feel to God. So I invite you to kneel now if you feel able. Bring to mind whatever it is that feels like it has gone too far. It might be something personal, something within your family, something within our community, or something you see in the wider world. Bring to the one who has already stood at a tomb, who has wept, who has been deeply moved, and who is not bound by what we have already decided is beyond hope. In front of you, there's a bit of paper which will give you some prompts to help you through this time. And on screen, there are some guiding points as well, just to help guide you through it. On the blank side of your bit of paper, I encourage you to write your own prayer of lament however you want. Might be scribbled words, whatever is meaningful for you. But take your time over this. There's no rush. When you're ready to bring it forward, I invite you to roll it up, fold up, roll up tightly, and place it in the wailing wall up here. No one will read these, and will burn them later after the service.